Here we talk about absolute versus relative references, and this is a continuation of our discussion from the last video about what happens when you try and cut, copy, and paste formulas. Sometimes you come up with the right answer, sometimes you get these weird looking answers, so we're going to talk about, well, what's going on and how to avoid the unintended results. So let's look at my example spreadsheet I've got going on here. I'm tracking the quarterly sales of 3 employees, Katie, Lorraine, and Daryl, and we're going from quarter 1 to quarter 4. I'm totaling them up in column G, and now I'm going to calculate their commission rate by multiplying their totals in column G, and I'm going to multiply it by 4% here, which is in column H. So I'm going to go into H5. I'll start off with my equal sign. I'm going to take G5, and I'm going to multiply that by what's in H2. So I'll click on H2, and I'll hit enter, and I get 937.68. So that's an accurate value, and Excel works very nicely in this case. Now, you remember back in a couple videos ago in Unit 1 actually, where we did the autofill, and we took January, and I wanted to fill out all the rest of the monthly headers, and I took this bottom right hand slightly enlarged black box and I just kind of dragged it down until we got to December. I can do that as well here with formulas, and I go down to H7 and I release it. You would think you would get accurate results here, but Excel sometimes messes things up. So I'm going to explain what's going on here in this case. Let's look at what I have in H5 first. So if I click on H5, you'll notice I have G5 times H2, and that's what I put in. That's great. So I get the result that I've expected. Now, before we move on, though, I want to point out that G5 and H2 are called references, and a reference is any cell that you have in your formula, right? So I'm referencing cell G5 and H2, which is my total for Katie Sumter, and I'm also referencing the 4% in H2. Okay, so now if I click on H6, right? Check out my references here. Excel is referencing G6, which is correct, right? Lorraine's total, but it's making a mistake with the second reference, and in this case it's referencing H3. That's not what we want, right? We want 4%, but because I'm autofilling in a downwards motion, right, from H5 to H7, it's also moving all those references down one cell as I go down, and this is not what we want, because by the time I get down to H7, now check out my references. G7 is correct, right? But it messes up my commission rate again, and it thinks it's H4, which really screws things up, because then it has text in there, it's trying to multiply numbers by text, and that's when we get that weird looking result, the number sign and the value. Okay, so this is a great chance actually to demonstrate our undo feature, which happens to be my best friend of all Excel features, and it's great because whatever you've done, whenever you make a mistake, whenever you have a problem, you can use undo to reset that last most recent action that you've done. And I can do that by hitting the blue arrow up here in the top left, or I can do my keyboard shortcut of Control Z, and it gets rid of that last mistake that I've made. And I can go back 10, 20 actions until I get rid of all the mistakes that I've unintended. So let's see how I can avoid this issue of a relative reference. Okay, I'm going to go back up into H5 and slightly modify the formula that I've entered here. I've got G5 times H2, and the G5 works great. The issue we have is the H2, our commission rate, and that stays the same no matter where I want to autofill, right? Up, down, or left, or right. That's going to stay the same. Now, what I've got to do to make this what's called an absolute reference is use a special symbol to indicate that H2 is absolute. It's not relative, and it always stays at 4%, which is in cell H2. So I'm going to get rid of that H2, and I'm going to type in that symbol, which happens to be a $sign, right? I'm going to type in a $H and a $2, and those $signs lock H2 no matter how many times we copy, cut, paste, or whatever we do. It's always going to reference H2. not a different cell. So when I hit enter here, I still get the same result for H5. But now when I click and drag and autofill this down to H7, it should, yeah, it comes up with much better results here. And if I were to click in any of these cells and take a look at my references, you're going to notice that H2 is still locked, right? No matter which of these cells I go to. So it takes G5 and it moves it down to G6 and G7, but all along it's keeping my second reference locked to H2. So this is great to remember, because I know this frustrates the heck out of people sometimes. Now let me show you one easier way to lock these cells. I'm going to go back actually and I'll undo just to show you. I'm going to get rid of my H2 reference and I'll go back to G5, I'll do it times, I'll type in H2. At this point, if you want to remember this shortcut key, it might make the absolute references a little bit easier to remember. You can hit F4 on your keyboard, and that will automatically translate that reference and make it absolute. So a lot of times this will make it faster instead of going back and typing in all those dollar signs, right? So I can hit enter here, and I'll do my autofill like we did previously, and I get my same results. Okay, so F4 is your shortcut key to change a relative reference to an absolute reference. Okay, one last thing before we wrap up. I don't want to confuse you too much here, but something you probably need to know is in actuality, if you take a look at our formula, right, we start with H5 and we're moving down one cell here, right? We go from H5, we go down to H6, and then we go down to H7, and you'll notice G5 changes to G6 and changes to G7. That's fine, right? We're only moving in a vertical motion. We're not moving horizontally from G to H to I. So our references also are only moving in a vertical direction, right? They're not changing from G to I or from H to J. They're going vertically only. So actually, all I need to do is make this reference locked in one dimension, right? The vertical dimension. I'm sorry, the vertical dimension, because I'm not going from left to right. So all I really need is to lock the two. I can get rid of this dollar sign before the H, and it's still going to work fine. If I go back to H5 now and I autofill it down, I'm still going to get the same answers, but I've only locked the 2 instead of the H. Okay, this is called a mixed reference. So it's one more type of reference to remember. You've got relative, which shift around. You've got absolute, which are locked. And then you've got mixed, which one dimension shifts, whether it's horizontal or vertical, while the other one remains locked. Okay, so I hope I've explained these and haven't confused you too much, but they are concepts to just keep clear in your mind for when you might be coming up with the wrong result with your formulas in the future.